Okay, so now we've placed some of the highlights, and it's time again to soften everything and to just dim the lights a little bit again on the hair, otherwise it'll end up being too stripy and too unrealistic, you know. Hey, welcome back to my studio. Today I will show you how to draw 3 different hair textures. It can be a little bit confusing, and even when you master it, how to draw, for example, wavy hair when it comes to drawing straight hair, or very kinky hair, it can be really tricky to understand what you need to do and how you need to apply highlights, shadows, and so on. So in this video, I will be taking you through how to draw straight hair, wavy hair, curly hair, and extremely curly, very kinky, frizzy hair. And we'll be showing you each one of those step by step. So make sure to watch till the end to get the most of the knowledge out of this video. Also, if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe, because there are more videos coming up that you might like very much. So far we have done a lot of different videos on different ways to use graphite pencils. Now for this tutorial you would need a nice piece of paper, some pencils, erasers, and a little Sharpie tool. Now if you don't know how to use this, I already have a video on how to create highlights in 5 different ways, and I go over this in quite a bit of detail. You might also like to use something to smudge your graphite in places, and for that I'd recommend using smudge sticks. Or you might like to use something like cotton tips, or something that you have handy around the house. You can also use brushes and other things for that. Now there are also other videos that are available on different substitutes that you might like to search for on my channel. Now the first kind of hair that I would like to show you how to draw is straight hair. Straight hair can seem like a simple thing to do, but don't be fooled, it can be actually quite tricky, because you have so much that's going on there, but not a lot of movement. So you have to make sure that you pay attention to every single little thing. Now I will show you how to create a little strand. First, to start with, I would like to create some really strong highlights. Now I'm using this etching technique. I'm just going to create few strands. Now I'm going to go for a sort of a softer to medium pencil, so something like 3B should be good enough. You can go for 2B or whatever you have handy. Okay, and I'm just going to start creating the strands. Now what you want to do is you want to make sure that you're going in the direction of the hair growth, so that you are not going against it in any way, because it will just make it so much harder, and you would have to recreate that whole look with applying highlights afterwards, which is just extra work really. So what I'm doing is I'm just working on these strands, and at the moment I'm just prepping the background color. Now remember, you need to pay attention to the either a person that you're drawing, or maybe a reference that you're using, because if you're working on dark hair, then you will get one kind of a look, and working on light hair, you will probably be seeing a very different sort of a way of highlight, light reflection and stuff like that. Okay, so here we go. So I've prepped quite a bit of this. You can see how I've already created these highlights, and these tiny little highlights are just going to stay in there, which is so wonderful and great for creating details. If you're working on natural hair, say, versus completely bleached hair, you would get natural color variations. Even some really dark hair would have natural color variations. So this is something that you can address on your on your drawing by creating darker and lighter strands. Now once this is done, I'm going to go in for my smudge stick. Now in this situation, I don't want to smudge it all the way across like that, because I don't want to smudge it completely. What I want to do is I want to just very softly merge these strands a little bit together and soften them, but without completely removing all of the texture that I've created. So remember, step 1 was scratching in a little bit of the highlights, then step 2 was to create a bit of a background shading, and step 3 was to give it a little bit of that softness with the smudge stick. Remember, you can use things like brushes and as well to create that sort of a look. Now what I'm going to do is, again with that same pencil, I'm just going to go over some of the strands that I can see are a little bit darker on my image, and just go over them again. This time even less smudging, very softly going over this. Now next step is to remove a little bit of the graphite that we've applied only in some areas. For that I'm going to use the putty rubber, and I'm going to shape it in quite a sort of a nice, give it a nice little peak, and I'm just going to go over it very softly in some areas. Don't forget to reshape it as it collects the graphite. You can create these highlights. Now highlights on the hair can be natural color variation, so for example, lighter hair strands or artificially placed highlights, or it can also be highlights because there's sun that's, or a light of any kind of light source really that can be directed at the hair, and you can see that light reflecting back, especially if the hair is quite shiny. And now let's treat the edges as well. Okay, so now again it's time to go in with a little bit of a smudge stick, just tiny little bit. And create a little bit of softness. At this stage also we can go in with a very detailed eraser. Now the difference between this eraser and this one is that with this one you can create very thin lines, but it doesn't lift the graphite as well as something like this. So for some really strong highlights, especially if you're working on the hair that is quite light or extremely shiny, even if it's dark hair but it's very shiny, then you will get quite a bit of this sort of going on through as well. Now at this stage what I want to do is I want to again apply quite a light pressure, but just go over and really soften some areas, because what you want to do is you want to avoid the very sort of a linear kind of a look, and this linear look can happen when you use a lot of erasers to lift the graphite up. So unless you're working on the hair that is sort of has those stripy highlights, what you want to do is in some areas you want to sort of just softly smudge them and darken some of the highlights, but in some areas you want to leave some stronger ones. Next step is to go over with a mechanical pencil. If you don't have a mechanical pencil, don't panic. I mean, it's not hard to find them, but you can always use your regular one. Just really just sharpen it really well. And at this point we can really brush the hair, so add little darker and lighter strands with very good precision, with quite a bit of focus. You don't want to go through everywhere, but you do want to get into some darker areas and some lighter ones as well. Of course, by controlling the pressure on the pencil or the softness of the lead, you can create darker or lighter lines. And at this stage, of course, when you come closer to the edge of the hair, like this is just a strand, but if you're working on the person, you'd have those areas probably by the face, you know, maybe if the hair is getting caught on the shoulder or something like that, then you can always just create these little sort of flyaways, or the areas where the hair strands get separated. Also pay attention to the way the hair finishes. Like here, I am working on hair that is quite, you know, almost like a little bit of razor cut in a way. But if you are working on the hair that has been bluntly cut like that, then again, you need to make sure that this is the look that you create. And again, to avoid that really outlined look, what you can do is you can use a really soft brush, or maybe a small smudge stick. Now with a small smudge stick you can go into little areas like this, and with a brush like this you can just really softly just go over and soften it. Just it would not give you the really smudged in look, but it'll give you the really softened sort of a look. Okay, so now let's focus on our hair texture number 2. So this type of hair is in between the very curly and the straight. We have a little bit of a wave, we have a bit of a twist, so maybe someone who's got straight hair naturally but perhaps curled it or something like that. So let's have a look at how that kind of hair is done. Now I'm gonna work on sort of a one nice big strand, so I'm gonna give the strand a direction, so depending on how it is curling, so an overall shape. So all the same things apply to this type of hair as they would to this. So make sure that the hair, make sure that you pay attention to the color of the hair that you are working on. Also make sure that the actual shininess of the hair, that you take note of that. So here I've got hair that's going quite straight, and here it starts to curl. Now this is the part where you need to make sure that you, just like we did here, that you follow with the direction of the hair and you do not go against it. With the straight hair we just went sort of up and down these long strands. Here, because the hair curls, we get these sections of hair that's just bending a little bit, few strands. And just like over here, first we want to build up the overall sort of a layer, the overall shade. At the moment I'm not looking at any details, I'm just giving that main direction. Next step is to give it a bit of a smudge. Next I'm going in with some darker areas. So now this is the time where you really want to pay attention to what's happening, not just to the overall shape of the hair, but also what happens within those strands of hair. So some areas are a bit darker, some are a bit lighter, and so on. Now the difficulty part with curly hair compared to straight hair is that there's just so much more stuff going on that you need to keep an eye on. But the cool thing is that you get so much more variation in terms of hair strands and things like that, you know, the highlights that are created, and it's just so much fun to draw the little bits that you kind of forget about it being more difficult, and you just enjoy the process of capturing it. You get more variations between the light and the shadow. You know, because you've got more shapes for light to bounce off. But I'm still not going into too much detail. I'm still working on the overall shapes. But just like we did here, we could have done, you know, that scraping thing in the beginning, but I just want to show you something without it, an opportunity to see different techniques in action. So see now, rather than just going for the hair strands, I'm also looking at some of the shadows that are just a little bit more dominant. I'm still not going all full sort of darkness in, because I want to leave a little bit more space for me to do that if I want to a little bit later. Now again, I'm just gonna softly go over this and give it an overall softening. Now remember, I'm not smudging it completely and totally, just like we did with straight hair, just really softly. Helping to merge these different shades together. So now we've got our base, we've got our shape overall, and we can even see the direction of the hair. Now next, let's go in and bring out some of the highlights so that we can work over them again. So I'm just going to just pick up a couple of lighter strands. Remember, these are not separate little hairs, these are just small little strands of few hairs. Especially those areas, you see how that curl goes a little bit rounder, so that highlight that it would be the strongest would be right in the middle, sort of where it would be catching the most light. Now of course, if your light direction is from another area, that strand could probably and possibly have the most light, but that's why it's so important to have a reference to look at. And just like with straight hair, you know, if your hair, if the hair that you're working on is multitonal, or if it's just a light reflections, you know, highlights, make sure you place those all in. Okay, so now we've placed some of the highlights, and it's time again to soften everything and to just dim the lights a little bit again on the hair, otherwise it'll end up being too stripy and too unrealistic. Okay, now I'm gonna go for a darker one because I want to make this just a little bit darker than this one, and just in some areas I'm going to create these really dark bits and pieces. If you are enjoying learning through videos and finding out new tips and tricks, and also doing it in a very relaxing atmosphere with some tingles here and there, make sure to check out my Patreon page, because for just $8 a month you will get access to all the extra videos, and from $2 a month you will be able to start supporting this channel as well. So make sure to check it out. There are lots of other things as well you can choose, but for now let's get back to the video. Now it's time for another soft smudge. Highlights. Now at this stage I'm still looking at strands rather than separate little hairs. Next I'm gonna go in for the mechanical eraser, and in some areas, just like we did here with this lot, I'm just going to give it a few little flyaways, few strands, or maybe really go in detail on some of the shadows. Some separate little strands. This is the time also to think about, how the hair finishes. So if here we had sort of this razor cut, so here it might carry on that flick, or depending on again your reference. And again, you probably guessed it, we're gonna go over with a bit of a smudge very quickly this time. Okay, so at this stage I am going to go for mechanical eraser and add few lighter strands, little ones, sort of more mimicking the single little hairs here and there. Just cleaning up that gap there. And here we've got lots of little strands that are kind of, even though they're still going with the same direction, but they cross over some of them, and very playful. Now I'm gonna go for my tiny little mechanical pencil, and now I'm gonna do those little flyaways, how we did here. So I'm gonna do the same thing here too, so just those tiny little ones that are so some here that's separating a little bit from the strand. And that's quite important for that sort of a very natural look as well. And again, for just some final little and some dusting off. With a soft smudge. Okay, now let's move on to the third type of hair texture, and that's very curly, very sort of a kinky type of hair. If you guys are interested in any of the names of the materials that I use, I will leave some links underneath the video so you can go and check them out. So kinky hair or extremely tight curl, you can also get this hair in a very sort of a frizzy kind of a way, or you can get it more shiny, more defined. I will show you how to do my version, and then you can of course, you know, tweak it a little bit according to what you are working on. Okay, so for that I'm also going to do a little separate strand. And now for this strand I've got this really tight, but at the same time very spirally here. So I've marked my main hair directions here. Now I'm going to start shading. I'm again using 3B, so something in the middle of the softer range of pencils. Also, a lot of the times this kind of hair gets thicker on the top and gets thinner as it frays as well. So I'm gonna try and do a similar kind of a look. You see, the reason why it's so useful and handy to put these central lines through is that now I don't really need to think about where it's going next. I've got that whole image of what it'll look like. All I need to do is just create the appropriate thickness. Now when you're working on a, say for example, head full of hair like this, you can also put little central lines across and then work through, especially if it's well defined. Now if it's quite a sort of a mane, then of course there will be a completely different approach. But in this video I'm just showing you how to do strands of those type of hairs. Now if you would like me to do a video on how to do a full head of hair of any type, let me know and I'll see what I can do. And don't forget, I already have some videos on how to draw a face and hair on my Patreon page. Next, just like before, we want to soften it. Next, I'm gonna go for a softer pencil like 7B and go over some of the darker areas. Now, because this hair is quite kinky, each little bump, each little sort of a thing that protrudes would be catching quite a bit of light. But again, please pay attention to how shiny the hair is, because sometimes it's shiny and then you will get these really strong highlights, but sometimes it can be quite matte, and so therefore the highlights won't be as bright. And just like with anything else and all the other types of hair, we're not looking at any details at this stage, we're just working on that main sort of a mass and shade. And you guessed it, let's give it a bit of a smudge. Okay, so next I'm gonna go in for the putty rubber and I'm gonna apply some of the stronger highlights, so some things that would be catching the most light. So for example, little things that would stand out, kind of similar to here, but because this is so much more tighter, you get a much tighter highlight as well. Because I didn't put really strong highlights, I don't really need to smudge. If you have gone a bit too much, then you can use your smudge stick again. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply more of the separate sort of strands and just hairs themselves, just like this, softly. Also, because I want it to be somewhat frizzy, I'm going to be applying little sort of going just a little bit outside of what we have marked so far. So it's a good tip. So if you're working on the frizzy hair, make sure that you are working just a little bit outside and you've got a little bit more chaos, some areas that might be really dark, you can shade them in, and then later we'll be able to soften them a little bit. Time for some more smudging and softening. Okay, now let's put little tiny but strong highlights that we can see in the hair. Now a little bit more softening. For this type of hair, this is the most important part. When you've got a tiny little pencil, again, remember, if you don't have a very good mechanical pencil, you can always just keep sharpening your regular one. So this is where we're starting to really build up that frizzy kind of a look. Now the difference between very shiny hair and frizzy hair is that shiny hair sort of is stuck together more, and frizzy hair, you've got each little hair on its own doing its own thing, and of course each little hair reflects the light the way it wants to in the direction that it goes, and so you've got this very chaotic kind of a look. You don't have the very sort of a structured, very shiny appearance because of that. So this is just one thing to, you know, to notice when you're studying your subject matter or your reference. And alongside the strand you can get like almost like another tiny little strand forming. And of course, you know, this is the technique for true chaos, just going round and round. And just keep building it up and layering it up. Of course, depending on the effect that you want to create, if you want it to be really frizzy, then just keep going and going and going. You know, create more and more flyaways that are further away from your sort of a major main strand of hair, like that. And these highlights will not be very strong and very large. So you see how I made large ones for if you were going to do the very silky sort of a type of hair, but now because we're going for the frizzy look, I will show you how to do that too. So just by you know, for that sort of a more natural look. I mean, of course, a lot depends on the hair, the kind of hair that you're drawing. Is it naturally so such tight curl? Is it, you know, has it been artificially sort of a curled in that way? And things like that. And you might find that you might have to go after you've done all the, you know, sort of fuzzy frizzy bits, that you might have to go in and, you know, make some of these areas a little bit darker, just because they sort of start to get lost. Again, it depends on the hair color that you are working on. So if it's blonde hair that's been curled like that, then perhaps you wouldn't have to, but the images I'm looking at have quite dark hair, I mean, there are lots of different types of hair. There's a very, very heavy, very straight, very dark hair. You know, that sort of where you get these almost glass-like reflections on. You can get a really soft and very frizzy hair, especially if it's light colored. You know, it's all like fluff. So there are lots of different hair textures. So let me know if there's anything specific that you would like me to do, if you want more videos like that, sort of explaining and talking about textures. And also let me know in the comments which one did you like the best. Maybe the one that you like to draw more, or maybe you just like the final look, or maybe just your personal preference, you know. So do let me know. I would really love to hear about that. Here we are. It's pretty much done now. Just a couple of more final steps and that's it. So before we finish completely, I would like to go over with a bit of a smudge stick, and just in the center, you see I'm not going with a smudge stick where we've done the little flyaway hairs, just here in the center, going like this and smudging. If you're working on a very small image, like quite a small drawing, then you can always use smaller sized smudge stick as well. And now to finish this off, dusting it out. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope you liked all the different ways that you can achieve highlights in the hair and build up the shadows and things like that. So please give this video a thumbs up if you liked it, or if it helped you to learn something. And don't forget to subscribe if this is your first time here. And I would also like to say a big thank you to all of my wonderful patrons who are already supporting me on Patreon. Thank you guys so much. As always guys, thank you for watching, and I hope you have a lovely day.